Did you know ASBN, America's Small Business Network, is now available on your TV? That's right. ASBN is now streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire Stick, and available for download in the App Store. Scan the QR code to download the ASBN app today. Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hi everyone, I'm Cheyenne Malone. You're watching another edition of The Small Business Show exclusively on ASBN.com and now streaming on Roku, Fire Stick, and Apple TV. Okay, so a subject that really can make or break any organization, big or small. It's not just a buzzword, it's the heartbeat of your business. We are talking about company culture, yes. Today we have culture strategist, author, and keynote speaker, Robert Richman. Robert, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. First, talk to us about your background and what makes you a company culture expert.
Sure. So I was culture strategist at Zappos.com, where we were well known for being a top place to work, as well as being #1 customer service, according to American Express customers. And since my tenure there, I've gone around the world speaking to some of the world's best companies about culture: Google, Whole Foods, Toyota, Eli Lilly, Westin Hotels, Bridgestone, many others. And wrote a book about it called The Culture Blueprint, The Guide to the High-Performance Workplace. And so yeah, that's pretty much my pedigree around culture.
And how do you define company culture?
Yeah, I actually define it in a way by what contains it. Because whenever I ask people the question, what is culture, I get 30 different answers, and they're all correct. But I think the most useful answer is what contains culture, because that's the only place we have control. We can't control people. The only control we really have in an organization is really two things: who we let in and who we kick out. Those are the boundaries of a culture. Everything that exists within there, it does exist in language, that's for sure. Culture is everything that's kind of communication based and not the business model itself. That's why I can consult for all these different companies, because it's all language and communication based. But our strongest control factors, the bookmarks of culture, are who you let in and why, and who you fire and why.
And why is it so important for an organization to have a good company culture?
Because at the end of the day, companies are all people, and we're not all robots, at least not yet. And that's to understand how people operate, how we work, what makes for a great, strong culture and team versus not, can be the difference between making it and breaking it.
In today's day, obviously, we've been through a lot with the pandemic and a lot of changes within jobs, right? Some people are working from home more often than not. Some people are, hybrid, and some people are back in the office. How can businesses kind of get on the same page with their company culture if they got a lot of moving parts, per se?
Yeah, so the #1 rule of culture is to co-create. Whenever anybody is doing especially a policy, they go into their back rooms, they figure it out, they say, this is now our policy. It oftentimes goes off the rail. But one, the co-creation process starts by getting feedback and saying, hey, look, this is our goal. Now, given that that's our goal, what do you think is the best that we should do in terms of hybrid, in terms of working here at the office or not? Get people's opinions, because when people feel heard, then they tend to take more ownership in the process. If they're not, they don't take a lot of ownership in the process. So #1 is really getting feedback. #2 is making it less of a absolute permanent policy and more of an experiment. They say, look, we believe that this will lead to greater productivity and better life for everybody if we do this, but we're not sure. And we need your feedback. So we're going to do this for the next 6 weeks. And at the end, we're going to collect feedback. But here's the catch. Only those who are fully all out participating, only their feedback is going to be heard. If you're not participating, then it's just your opinion. We want people from experience giving us feedback. And then everybody, even those who are against the policies, get on board because they say, I want to make sure my voice is heard. And then after that experiment period, then they can take the data and say, this is going to be our policy moving forward. And people are less likely to drag their feet because they've been a part of the process.
It used to seem like people would just kind of fall in place. In today's society and today's day, everyone, feels like they want to be heard. Talk about some common misconceptions about company culture.
I think the big misconception is that it's pool tables and lunches and barbecues and things like that makes up the culture. That's really the frosting on the cake of culture. what I've found is that it really took me over 10 years to figure out the culture is very, very simply based on one thing. That is trust. But trust is a word that only tends to come up if it's not there. We don't tend to use the word trust a lot if it's there. And so what determines trust is really, really one key thing, which is agreements. If you have clear agreements that are upheld, you have strong trust and you have strong culture. If the agreements are not clear, or if they are not upheld, then you have weak culture. And that's why I like to say it as strong and weak versus good and bad, because a good culture to me might be bad to you. You might hate it. But strong means that what the company does, says, and believes are all in alignment, versus a weak culture where certain people get to do certain things, other people don't. The agreements are unclear, communications are unclear, et cetera. So it's really about creating strong cultures through agreements. Is the key to culture.
Can you give an example of a company that has a good, solid, strong company culture?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, specifically with that Morningstar, which is a tomato processing plant in Northern California, one of the biggest, provides to Heinz and other companies, completely runs based on agreements. They actually have no bosses. Instead, everybody has contracts with each other and says, I will give you this, you will give me that, et cetera. And it runs more like a city than it does like a hierarchical organization.
Interesting. But like you said, it's not a one size fits all type of deal. It's whatever works for different companies. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs trying to just have a better company culture?
Well, it depends on which stage the entrepreneur is at. It always blows my mind how many people say they're a startup 6 years into their business. So I'm like, when are you going to say you're a business versus a startup? So entrepreneurs, it really depends on the state. If you're on your way to cash flow positive, then culture in a way takes a back seat. It's always there, but it's best just to notice it and be like, okay, why do we like these certain people, but we don't like these? And start to notice who and what is our culture, what values work, what behaviors and practices work. If you're already cash flow positive, which I think means you're no longer a startup, it means you're actually a business. Then it really comes down to consciously creating the culture and defining those values and behaviors and saying, this is why we let people in, because they meet this profile. And if they violate it, this is how we kick them out.
How do you necessarily evaluate your current company culture? Say, you're a business owner watching today and you feel like it's fine, but could use improvements. How would you know, and where would you go to kind of feel out what needs to be boosted up and where?
Yeah, the way we did it at Zappos was based on the schools of positive psychology out of Harvard University, where they found there's 4 factors that relate. And the first is that people want progress. Perceived progress, like they're progressing in their career. And by the way, people have different definitions of that. For some, it's money. For some, it's title. For some, it's skills. For some, it's that I get to work with certain people. There's about 10 others in there that people consider progressing. Number 2 is that they feel like they have some control over it, where companies where it's just favoritism and they don't get to say, this is the things that you need to do in order to progress. It tends to be a negative culture. Third is relationships. They found that if you have a best friend at work, it tends to be a great culture. And fourth is having a purpose beyond money. Why are we doing this beyond just making money? Mm-hmm. If you have those 4 factors, then it tends to be a very strong culture.
If you have a negative company culture, how do you get yourself out of that rut?
Yeah, I like to use a process called open space. It's a free open source technology, and technology to social technology. I put a site all about it for free information called openspace.events. And the idea is that you're saying to everybody, this is our goal, but we want to hear from everybody and get their frustrations out. Because the mistake leaders make is they think that if people go negative, that's a bad thing. I actually think we need environments that foster negativity, because, pardon the expression, but it's like kind of holding out the trash can when you've drank too much. Like, you got to get all that poison out of the system. So only when you do that can you really clear the plates enough to say, okay, what do we do next?
Any final thoughts you want to leave our viewers with today, Robert?
I'll leave you with a question. What do you think is the one point of reality that I found in every culture?
And I would say, obviously happiness is a big deal, but what makes you happy may not be what makes me happy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So meaning it's subjective. The only objective reality I've found in culture is time itself. Like right now, it's 10:43 a.m. Pacific time for me. If you said, no, it's 1 p.m. Pacific, we'd say, okay, you're in a different reality, right? So what does that lead to for us? Well, I've seen the strongest cultures, from Zappos to the Navy SEALs to you name it, tend to have a very, very big respect for time. They start their meetings on time. They end their meetings on time. They deliver on time and on deadline. Weak cultures tend to be late. Meetings run over, deadlines run over. So oftentimes I can tell how strong a culture it is by their relationship to time.
Very interesting. Speaking of, we are out of time. I'm going to keep you unscheduled. Robert Richman, thank you so much. Culture strategist, author, and keynote speaker. It was a pleasure having you, Robert.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Cheyenne Malone, exclusively on ASBN.com.